Australian students are not happy and psychology students are disengaged. And I'm going to tell you what I think is going on and what I think psychology needs to learn from what's going on.
Why I'm negative about positive
Back to the story, because I've got a story.
So I've got some top tips on
I
writing.
told you to think critically. It helps people like me stop doing stupid things. So we've had the results in from the Australian Student Experience Survey. This is a survey that's conducted every year. It asks students about their educational experience of university. It asks questions in relation to 5 broad categories: skill development, learner engagement, learning resources, teaching quality, student support. And the results are published on the Quality Indicators for Learning and Teaching website, QILT. The survey is sent out to a sample of both undergraduate and postgraduate coursework students in all Australia's universities, as well as to non-university higher education institutions. In 2020, the survey was sent to around 700,000 students, and around 44% of those students completed the survey. So it's a big survey. It's the biggest one that's run in Australia for students in higher education, and it's seen as the most important one in relation to improving the quality of learning and teaching in Australia's higher education sector. Now, this week, the results were published for the survey that was conducted in 2020, and the headlines being reported in news outlets like The Guardian are student satisfaction at Australia's universities dropped to all-time low. And it's been concluded that this is probably because of the impact of COVID-19, because universities closed their campuses around March 2020, and they didn't really start to open back up until the end of 2020. And that meant students' courses moved to online delivery. That result doesn't necessarily mean that online delivery is unsatisfying, but more likely means that if you move on-campus students online when they didn't choose to be online, they ain't going to be happy. So satisfaction dropped according to the Student Experience Survey, SES, and the biggest drop was in the extent students felt engaged. Learner engagement typically receives the lowest rating every year compared to the other areas in the survey, and it's usually hovering somewhere around 60% on average across the sector. So 60% of students say that they feel engaged, where presumably 40% don't. Now, in 2020, that 60% dropped dramatically. It dropped down to 44%. That was across all higher education courses. In psychology, the average hovers at around 50%. That's the lowest across all higher education courses. In 2020, AHPRA rating for psychology, learner engagement for psychology, dropped from 50% down to 34%. It appears psychology students are the least engaged students in the higher education sector, and in 2020, this kind of dropped off the cliff. So, a couple of interesting questions here. Why do psychology students rate learner engagement so low, and why did this drop even lower during 2020? Now, to answer this, we first need to ask how learner engagement is measured on the survey. Well, there are 7 questions in that section of the survey. 5 of those questions are about students' engagement with other students on their course. 1 question is on how prepared they feel for their studies, and 1 is on their sense of belonging to their institution. So a lot of the focus is on interaction with other students. Now, there's a worry that this measure of learner engagement is not a valid one for online students. And so that part of the survey was seen as particularly invalid for 2020, given practically every student went online at the start of 2020. That is basically built on the assumption that interaction with other students is not something valued by online students. There was some research undertaken by the Australian Council for Education Research on the SES survey back in 2016, culminated in a report published in 2017 that said just that. Essentially, it made the argument that online students value their relationships with their tutor more than their relationship with their classmates. And it's also argued that online students are more time constrained than on-campus students, which is why they choose to go online. They don't have enough time to go on campus. And this meant that they just don't have the time to interact with other students. They're too busy. But those assumptions have been shaken around quite a bit in 2020 because students who had chosen on-campus delivery had been transferred to online. So we can't say that in 2020 online students were those who didn't have time to socialize with other students and who didn't necessarily value time with their fellow students. They valued the time with their tutor more than they valued time with other students. So maybe that explains how learner engagement ratings fell off a cliff in 2020, because actually those on-campus students value interaction with other students, and they didn't get it when they went online. But we've got another assumption that was troubled in 2020, and this is the assumption which seems to be that online delivery only really offers students the opportunity to interact with their tutor rather than to interact with other students. But 2020 showed us that you can interact with others online quite easily, and you can do that in groups, like in a classroom setting. And 2020 showed us that online delivery can allow students to interact with each other in a virtual classroom. So maybe it's something about the way teaching has been delivered online, in that it has perhaps mostly been delivered as a way for tutors to communicate with students and students to communicate with their tutor, but not for students to communicate with each other. Even though we have increasingly adopted video conferencing software to deliver teaching, such as Zoom, maybe we aren't using that as a way for a group to communicate with each other, with other people in the group, but rather as a way for the tutor to communicate with a group and for the group to communicate with the tutor, the group being the class. So maybe we're just teaching online in the same way we deliver lectures in a classroom. The tutor talks to the students can talk to the tutor, but students don't talk to each other. The way lecture theatres are designed. Students sit shoulder to shoulder with each other, and they can just see the back of the heads of students in front of them, and they can't see the students behind them. Their attention is purposefully directed on the tutor. That's why lecture theatres are designed that, because it's believed that tutors need to listen to the tutor, students need to listen to the tutor, and they don't need to listen to each other. That type of delivery is called sage on the stage. So maybe online delivery is dominated by that sage on the stage approach to teaching. And maybe that is what's being shown in those previous survey results, where online students kind of said that they didn't feel as though there was much they didn't feel engaged because they didn't interact with their other students. And maybe this has just been brought out into the daylight in 2020 because of the COVID lockdown. Now, we don't know if that's true, if teaching is delivered in that type of way online, but it's a possibility that's worth considering, to think if there's something wrong in the way we deliver online teaching. Indeed, the 2020 results do show that low student satisfaction with engagement appear to be largely impacted by students not being satisfied with the opportunities to interact with other students. And what about psychology students? Now, I've been teaching psychology for nearly 3 decades now, and over that time, I've seen a slow move to increased online delivery. I've taught in 3 or 4 different universities, but I've been an external examiner on about 4 or 5 universities, and I've been a visiting lecturer in more universities than that across Asia, Australia, Africa, Europe. So I've got a bit of experience here. And what I've seen is there's been an increase in online delivery over the years, but there's been a bit of resistance to that. And largely that resistance is because there's a belief in psychology that face-to-face teaching is important. And that's because psychology is all about working with people, and students need to have that in-person teaching experience because it's important to learn about people and to be around people whilst you're learning about people. It seems kind of sensible, doesn't it? Seems to be a sensible point of view. Except psychology hasn't really shifted away from that sage on the stage approach, where teaching is largely delivered through the lecture format and where the tutor talks to students and students don't really talk to each other. And you can see this carrying through into tutorials, which are mostly run in psychology programs as mini lectures. And again, I've seen this from working in many different universities. But that's not to say that all psychology lecturers teach in that way, but I think there's a surprising number who do. And that might be because teaching in psychology is largely driven by content and by inputs. We're more concerned about the knowledge we think students need. And it's less focused on process and outputs, which is things like the way students learn and the skills that they're going to graduate with. Now, if the survey items that measure learner engagement are biased towards measuring engagement as being that which takes place with other students rather than that which takes place between the student and the tutor, and that's the reason why when students are online, they rate learner engagement as low, is that such a bad thing? Is that a bad bias? I kind of think that's a good bias and one that we'd want in psychology. We would actually want to problematize that form of engagement where it's just between the student and the tutor. We'd probably want our students to engage with other students. And I think engagement with other students is absolutely critical for psychology, as we're all about working with people. Learning how to engage with your tutor is very different to learning how to engage with people who you want to help. Your role as a student is not to help your tutor. I mean, that's obvious. Just see the teacher evaluations I get from students, and they're not necessarily wanting to help me. But, the role of the student is not to help the tutor. The role of the tutor is to help the student. But your role as a student could be, and I think should be, about helping your fellow students. So I think there you have that opportunity to work with other people while you're studying psychology that can actually benefit those other people, and you learn how to work in a way that can be beneficial for others. And in that case, others are your classmates. I think it's a perfect opportunity, and I think we should be embracing that opportunity. And I wonder if we've missed that opportunity in psychology. So that's what I think we can read into the results of the student experience survey, where psychology comes right down at the bottom in terms of learner engagement. Everything fell off the cliff, but learner engagement in particular. And for psychology, it's stark. It's stark how many students feel that they're disengaged because they don't interact with their fellow students. Anyway, they're my thoughts on that survey and what it might mean for us in psychology. Till next time. Ta-ta.